If you've found value in our Bible lessons, we ask that you would consider a year-end donation to Fig Tree Ministries. Fig Tree Ministries is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we rely entirely on the donations from our generous supporters. So your donation directly impacts our ability to continue to create lessons that help people go deeper into the biblical text. So you'll find a link to our donation page in the description section below. We so appreciate your generous support as we work to expand God's kingdom here on earth. So we hope you enjoyed today's lesson on the book of Judges, and I hope that you can see that this lesson still applies in our world today. So we're not going to go read those, but I just wanted you to know where you can find that phrase, they did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Okay, now, inside that cycle, now what I want you to do is turn to chapter 9 in Judges. Because inside that cycle is going to be an event and a parable, and this is the first parable that we find in the Bible. And it's, well, you'll see, it's a brilliant parable. All of them are brilliant, but you could call it the parable of the trees, because it's the trees that want a king. And if you turn to Judges 9, all of it happens in Judges 9, and I'm just going to loosely describe what's going on, but it's all taking place right here in that picture behind you. Mount Gerizim and Shechem, you'll see those two names show up. And Judges 9, if you followed along, Gideon just died. So Gideon was the leader. Gideon dies. Now who's going to take over? Well, Gideon had a lot of sons. He had over 72 sons. Now, this is where the symbolic nature of Judges, because some scholars argue it's probably a symbolic number. But it says, you'll see it in the text in a minute, that he had 70 sons, or at least 70. There's 70 nations. That number 70 is repeated in the chapter. That's why scholars sometimes think, well, there's probably something symbolic going on. But one of his sons wants to be the king. And so what he's going to end up doing is murdering all of his brothers to become king. So if you look at chapter 9, verse 1, this is how the chapter starts out. There's a guy named Avi Melek. He's the son of Jerubbaal. Now, Jerubbaal, you're like, who's that? Well, that's Gideon. So they switch names on you. That's not helpful. So Abimelek, and Abimelek means, it means my father the king, because Gideon was the king. And then it says, Abimelek went to his mother's brothers in Shechem. That's the city right back in that valley in Shechem. And he's going to say to them, look, you don't want all those other sons in charge of you. I'm your blood. Why don't you just make me the king? And then I'll rule over you. And so they say, okay, yeah, you can be the king. And he says, well, give me some money, 70 shekels, by the way. There's the repeating 70. And he gets a bunch of people. He goes over and, well, let's look at verse 5. So look down at verse 5. So it says, he went to his father's home. Now the father is Gideon, and on one stone murdered his 70 brothers. So that's where you get the idea of 70 brothers for this guy, or at least 70 sons. So this is not a good way to become king, by murdering by murdering all your brothers. But one brother, it says, but Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, escaped by hiding. So one brother gets away. And this is going to be the guy who in a minute will read the parable that he's going to say. So he escapes, and he's going to go back and warn the people at Shechem. So if you look at verse 7, chapter 9, verse 7, so when Jotham was told about what Abimelek did, he climbed up on top of Mount Gerizim. That's where I'm standing when I took that picture. And he shouted to them, listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you. And now what's going to follow is a parable, and we'll read it in a minute. But I got to tell you about a tree before we get there. So he's going to give them a lesson about what they just did by selecting Avi Melek as their king. And then we're going to get the parable of the trees. The trees want a king. They go to the olive tree first, then they go to the fig tree, then they go to the vine, and then when all of them said, no, thank you, I don't want to be king, they go to a tree called, in Hebrew here, a tad. Now, your Bible probably says bramble or thorn bush down in verse 15. But the Hebrew word is atad, and atad means thorn. So if your book says thorn bush, it's not completely wrong, but you have to know the specific tree that has thorns, and that's very helpful. So this is a picture of an atad tree. Doesn't look like much, but it's very specific tree with very specific characteristics. This atad tree is at the city of Gezer. If anybody's been to Gezer. As a way of reference, let me just say this. Understanding this tree, and we'll go over the characteristics in a minute, you'll see how it fits in the parable. Understanding this tree is key to understanding the parable. And if you're interested in doing any research on this, or you wanted a reference to it, there's a gentleman, he passed away, but his name is Noga Haravini, and he wrote a book called Tree and Shrub in Our Biblical Heritage. And Noga, his parents, Dr. and Dr. Haravini, they were both PhD botanists, lived in Israel, and they studied all the plants in Israel and the plants of the Bible. And then Noga Haravini went on to run a sanctuary, a plant sanctuary there in Israel. And so he says, here's the tree, here's the atad that they're talking about, is this one right here. So we have to ask, well, what is it about that tree that they know that it's in the text? So this is number 5 on your handout. So the atad tree, that tree in the background, first of all, it is a fruit tree, but it's not a fruit tree that the Israelites used to sustain themselves. The fruit is not abundant. The wild atad barely has any fruit. Today, there's domesticated atad trees, and they've gotten the fruit to grow a little bit larger. But it is a fruit tree, but not an abundant fruit tree. So it doesn't provide for the people. That's one of the key things. This tree doesn't do anything for the people. One of the benefits of an atad tree, and almost the only benefit of the atad, is shade. We're going to see this in the parable. So the shepherds use the atad tree for shade in the heat of the day. If you're a wheat farmer, you can take a break from farming your wheat and go sit in the shade of an atad. But if you own an orchard, so if you happen to own an orchard, say olives or grapes, grapevines, or fig trees, you want to get rid of atad trees. The farmers get them away from their field. So the atad tree is harmful to fruit trees. The roots will suck up all the water. And this is going to play into the parable. You'll see it's brilliant. So they're harmful. Nothing can, if you're a fruit tree, you can't grow fruit underneath an atad. The only other thing it's good for is if you cut it down, the wood burns very well. So you get a lot of kindling. And this, by the way, is all from Noga Haravini. The kindling is good. The fire burns very hot. So it is good for burning in a fire. And we'll see that in the parable as well. So not very fruitful. There's great shade. That's what everyone uses it for. You don't want to have an atad near your fruit trees or they'll take all the water, but the wood is good for burning. And if we go back to this picture, you can see at the base of this tree down here, there's a whole bunch of shade. And if it's a hot day in the sun in Israel, you'll do anything to try to find some shade. So, okay, that's the atad. That's the one bush that we need to know. So if we go back to our text in Judges 9, so go to verse 7. If you have Judges 9, verse 7, because now we're going to go look at the parable. So this is now, this whole parable is against the guy Avi Melek who killed all his brothers. So verse 7, when Jotham was told about this, he climbed up on top of Mount Gerizim and shouted to them, "Listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you." Verse 8, one day the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves. So now he's beginning the parable. So the trees want a king. They said to the olive tree, "Be our king." So you have the olive tree. But the olive tree answered, Should I give up my oil, which both gods and humans are honored by, to hold sway over the trees? Hey, I've got something that is good for you. Why would I give up my good job here to go be a king? Okay, so he says no. Next, verse 10. Next the trees said to the fig tree, "Come be our king." But the fig tree replied, "Should I give up my fruit, so good and sweet, to hold sway over the trees?" Next, verse 12. They said to the vine, "Come be our king." So now we're up to the grapevine. But the vine answered, "Should I give up my wine, which cheers both gods and humans, to hold sway over the trees?" Right? These are all plants that produce good stuff. Okay, now comes the punchline here. Finally, and this is the NIV I'm reading, finally all the trees said to the, and mine says thorn bush, the atad, "Come be our king." So the thorn bush said to the trees, and this is where you have to know the tree, "If you really want to anoint me king over you, come take refuge in my shade." That points us to that tree. Now, if you're a fruit tree and you try to go live underneath an atad, what will happen? You die. You can't live underneath an atad. Fruit trees will die. So he says, look, yeah, if you really want me to be king, come live under my shade, which is death. And then it says, but if not, fire will come out of the atad, right? Let fire come out of the atad. So you can see that it's a good tree for fire, and consume the cedars of Lebanon. So the whole thing is pay attention to who you're putting as leader, right? If you put someone in charge of you that has nothing to offer to begin with, why do you think they're going to be a good king? How do you expect to live underneath a king that can't provide anything for the people? Well, except for shade, but the trees can't live under the shade. So there's a lesson of choosing your leader, and it all has to do with this tree right here, the atad tree, and who can or cannot live underneath that. So it's a brilliant parable that I think even today people would say, yeah, there's a real warning for who you choose to make your leader, because if the person has nothing to offer and you choose them as your leader, it could be death or destruction for society. So, okay, so that's the parable.